We can't let Ukraine fall, because if it does, then there's a significant likelihood that America will have to get into the conflict. Not simply with our money, but with our servicewomen and our servicemen. We can either stop Russia in Ukraine by continuing our military and economic support, or we can face a challenging situation where Vladimir Putin and Russia are able to overrun Ukraine and then threaten NATO allies.
No doubt that that's Putin's goal.
We have no doubt that if Vladimir Putin is successful in Ukraine, he won't stop.
Or you're not. And if you are, then what comes with that is a responsibility to protect freedom and democracy when it comes under attack from totalitarian regimes, I would think.
I think if you look at the history of American foreign policy, it's very hard to make the case that our principal goal has been to protect freedom and democracy. The United States has a rich history of overthrowing democracies around the world, and we have a rich history of siding with some of the world's biggest dictators. So this idea that we're out there protecting freedom and democracy and it's our principal goal, in my opinion, doesn't mesh with reality.
All right, guys, so we got to talk about Discount Obama, who you just heard there on 60 Minutes, fear-mongering to the American people about why we need to continue to send billions and billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine, okay? And he's basically saying, look, if we don't continue to send billions of dollars to Ukraine for them to defend themselves against Russia, U.S. troops will be put on the ground, right? So he's basically saying, if you don't support our policy, then you must support U.S. troops going to war with Russia. However, I think what this dude is doing is he's BSing, right? I think what he's saying is bullshit, because I do not think that Russia is going to invade NATO, okay? And I do not think that U.S. troops will be put on the ground to defend Ukraine. I think these politicians know what likely is going to happen in the event that Ukraine actually starts to win, and most likely is not going to be a good outcome for Ukraine. And this is why I'm very critical of these politicians that continue to suggest that we should push Ukraine into continuing to sacrifice themselves fighting Russia in order for our defense contractors to get paid and then to send campaign donations to our politicians, right? These people are evil, right? They're quite literally sacrificing people's lives so that they can get richer and they can get reelected and they can make American companies rich off taxpayer dollars. And then they turn around and point the finger at you, who opposes sending taxpayer funds to Ukraine, who says, hey, we think that we should force Ukraine to make peace right now so they don't lose more of their territory and the lives of their people, right? They point the finger at you as if, hey, you're the bad guy, okay? You don't want to stand up for freedom and democracy, when none of this is about freedom and democracy. It's never been about freedom and democracy. And that is going to be explained to Piers Morgan by political scientist John Mearsheimer, okay, who is going to school Piers Morgan on U.S. foreign policy, because Piers Morgan is one of these people who believes in this fairy tale that the West likes to tell the normies, right, regular, normal, everyday people about why we fight wars, which is because of freedom and democracy, right? We're out here trying to liberate people, right? And it's never about that, okay? It hasn't been about that since what? Probably World War II, okay? So I'm just saying, this guy, who I feel like is pretty base, he's going to debate Piers Morgan on this issue of Russia and Ukraine. And he's going to basically school Piers Morgan on the fact that, hey, if Ukraine actually does start winning against Russia, ultimately that's not going to be good for Ukraine because Putin is probably going to use nukes. And Piers Morgan, his rebuttal to that is that, well, the United States will use nukes in response to Putin using nukes in Ukraine, and that's why they won't use nukes, right? And this guy is like, no, you don't understand. Like, you really don't understand how this works. The United States is not going to use nukes in response to Putin using nukes in Ukraine because Ukraine is not NATO and Ukraine is not of any strategic importance to the United States of America, which, again, supports this idea that all these politicians know this, right? They know what the likely end result is if they do not force peace now, but they're pushing forward with it, knowing that it could ultimately lead to more lives lost because, again, they want to get paid, right? And they want to get our defense contractors paid as well too, which again makes these people not good people, right? You're not a good person knowingly sacrificing Ukrainians when it's not even in our interest to do so, right? Because again, Ukraine serves no strategic importance. So let's react to this clip because this is a fascinating exchange.
So
You
the
can't
idea
honestly,
that
sorry,
if
but Professor,
Russia-
you cannot honestly think that Vladimir Putin could drop a nuclear weapon on the people of Ukraine and there would be no response from America or the West.
I said there wouldn't be a nuclear response. Well, there may be a response, but there won't be a nuclear response.
Yeah, there'll be more sanctions, right? And more tough talk, which, by the way, haven't worked, okay? Russia's GDP growth, I think is actually outpacing the United States' GDP growth. They have found ways to sell their oil at a discount, which, by the way, you can thank Russia for gas prices not being higher than they actually are, okay? Because essentially they've been forced to kind of sell their oil at a discount, which has increased the demand for Russian oil. And guess who's buying it up? China and India. So Russia has now basically figured out how to get around the United States, okay, how to get around the sanctions. Their economy's still growing. And yeah, there's not much we can really do, okay, at this point when it comes to more economic sanctions against Russia. If anything, we have essentially forced them to figure out how to establish some independence from the United States in the West and still grow their economy. So I would argue that the sanctions have actually backfired, to be quite honest with you.
Because you want to remember that if we hit Russia with American nuclear weapons or Western nuclear weapons, the end result is the Russians will retaliate against us. And we do not want to be hit with nuclear weapons. This is why we don't want Ukraine to have nuclear weapons. It's why we didn't want West Germany or South Korea or Japan to have nuclear weapons during the Cold War.
East Germany, you mean, do you?
No, West Germany. We didn't want West Germany to have nuclear weapons because our great fear was that if the Soviets overran West Germany, the West Germans would use nuclear weapons, they would hit the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union would retaliate against the United States.
Yeah, that's a good point, right? And that's also the reason why I said that I think that it is in the U.S.'s best interest to continue to defend Israel, okay? And what I mean by that is that, well, Israel allegedly has nukes. It would make sense not to allow them to get taken over by Iran, right? That probably would make sense, okay? So, outside of the nukes, if they didn't have nukes, though, I think I would have a much harder time buying into the case for continuing to support Israel the way that we do with billions of dollars in aid every year, right? I mean, again, it's because they have nukes. That is the primary reason why we don't want them to get taken over. And this is why I think that the U.S. policy towards Israel really should be, look, we'll help you defend yourself, which is a lot cheaper than helping them attack other people. Like, for example, bomb Iranian embassies, right? We probably should not be helping them do that. Okay, we shouldn't be helping them essentially drag us into a war with Iran, because at that point, you're now becoming a liability, okay? So, again, my stance is that, well, even though I don't want to keep giving you aid, we kind of have to because we don't want them to get taken over. They have nukes. The last thing we want are nukes in the hands of Islamic extremists. Probably not the best idea, right? So, again, that's the situation we're in with Israel.
We don't want to become involved in a nuclear war.
But then it seems if
So we're not going to fight.
Right, I understand that. But if a nuclear power like Russia can simply use its nuclear weapons with impunity and other nuclear powers do not respond, then the nuclear deterrent collapses, doesn't it? Because they've just ignored it.
No, it doesn't. It has no effect on our nuclear deterrent. Our nuclear deterrent remains intact. And the fact is the Soviet Union during the Cold War and Russia today will not attack the United States for fear that we would use our nuclear deterrent against the Soviet Union in the Cold War and Russia today. But the point is that if the Russians were to use nuclear weapons inside of Ukraine today, we would not respond with a nuclear attack on Russia because that would precipitate a general thermonuclear war. And the last thing we want is a general thermonuclear war. This is not to say we would be happy about the fact that Ukraine was hit with nuclear weapons, because we certainly would not be, and we certainly would respond in some way. But we would not respond with a nuclear strike on Russia.
I mean, it just wouldn't be worth it. I mean, this dude is exactly right. He's 100% right. Ukraine is not of strategic interest enough or importance enough to go to nuclear war with Russia, right? It's just not that important. It's just not. Okay, this is why realistically they're not going to put boots on the ground to protect Ukraine. All the politicians know that they're not going to do that. Again, people like Hakeem Jeffries, they threaten that as a way to get people on board with funding something that they know the likely outcome for. And again, it's going to be $1 trillion endeavor, wasted resources down the drain. But hey, you know, we weakened Putin's already weak army, right? Because I personally think that the fact that this war has dragged on for so long shows two things. That, again, the Russians are weaker than we thought, and Putin's not that vicious, right? He's not a Stalin. He's not a Lenin, right? He ain't that guy, okay? He's really not. Because if he was that guy, the war would be over, okay? Again, this is what the left argues, that Putin is that guy. He's going to take over Ukraine, and then he's going to attack NATO. Well, I'm telling you for a fact it's not going to happen, because he's struggling to get Ukraine. So if he's struggling to take over Ukraine, why in the world do you think he would attack NATO? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't even make logical sense. It makes no sense at all. But this is what they're trying to sell to people. The fact that Putin is struggling with Ukraine tells you, oh, nah, he's not really a threat. Do anything to NATO, even if he takes Ukraine. And this is why, if you're actually concerned about boots being on the ground and U.S. Military troops getting involved in a foreign conflict, you don't really need to worry about Ukraine. What you need to be worried about is Israel and Iran. That's what you really should be worried about, because if that escalates to a full-blown conflict, best believe the politicians will have no problem whatsoever. They won't think twice about sending American blood to be sacrificed to protect Israel. They won't think twice about it. I guarantee you, okay? It is shut and closed. They'll definitely do it, 100%. And you know who also knows that? Israel knows that. That's why they're so comfortable with, again, bombing Iranian embassies in Syria, other countries, and also bombing their pipelines, right? They're comfortable doing these acts of war because they know if push comes to shove, if Iran actually gets serious and declares war on Israel, that the United States is going to defend them, right? They know that the politicians will have no problems sending our young people, okay, your son, your daughter, to go and fight on behalf of Israel to protect Israel, okay? They know that. This is why they're so emboldened. They don't care, okay? Because they know they got the U.S. politicians in the bag, bruh. Straight up. Straight up. Otherwise, they wouldn't be so reckless.
Would we respond that would have any effect?
I'm not sure. It's very hard to say. I mean, even if we used simply conventional weapons, we got involved in the war with Russia, we would then have a great power war between Russia on one side and NATO on the other side, which included the United States. And once you have a great power war involving Russia versus the United States, the danger of nuclear escalation presents itself. And this, of course, is why President Biden has wisely said that under no circumstances will American military forces be introduced into the Ukraine war, because he understands that once you do that, you're out on the slippery slope. You're out on the slippery slope to nuclear escalation. And the last thing we want, as I've emphasized to you, is a nuclear war between Russia and the United States.
No, I get that. But if Russia was to use one, that is right there, the nuclear escalation that you are so keen for everyone to avoid. It's a deliberate act of nuclear provocation. And I just...
Yeah, but Ukraine is not NATO, Pierce, right? That's the point that he's saying. He's saying, look, Ukraine is not NATO. So even if Putin was to use a nuke in Ukraine, it don't really affect us. It'd be sad, right? It's not something I want to see happen. It would suck, but it does not cause for us to escalate to the point of actually responding in kind, right? We're not going to do that, okay? And the reason why is because of mutually assured destruction. Ukraine is not a part of NATO, so therefore they did not attack anybody that's a part of the defense alliance. So we're not required to respond. Again, I don't understand what Pierce is missing about that. He's operating in a realm in which he believes that Ukraine is some value ally of the West. And that's just not true. Okay. Ukraine for us really is just a bunch of bodies between Russia and the NATO countries, right? That is the honest to God truth. It's like, you know, it pains me to say that, but that's the way they see it. This is why they don't have a problem spending these billions of dollars, probably over $1 trillion in total that we're going to spend, sending these people to fight a war that most likely probably is not going to end well. And this is why people like me say, no, we need peace now. We need to force them to come to a peace agreement now so that Ukrainian lives can be saved. But when you say that, the politicians, the Democrats will say, oh, well, you're pro-Putin. And it's like, no, I'm not pro-Putin. I'm actually pro-Ukrainian lives, right? Ukrainian lives matter over here, okay? That's what I'm pushing. You're not. You're the ones that don't really value Ukrainian lives, okay? This is why you want to continue this war.
I just cannot imagine that in that eventuality, with hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians being slaughtered with a nuclear weapon by Russia, I just cannot imagine that there would be no similar response from the West. They would have to.
I don't believe that. I don't believe that for 1 second.
Well, then what you're really doing, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
war.
aren't you painting a picture then of Russia being effectively infallible here? They can do what the hell they like.
My point to you is that if the Russians are losing in Ukraine, and Ukraine and the West are winning, the Russians, I believe, will initiate nuclear use in Ukraine. And they will do that not only because they think they are facing an existential threat, but also because they will not fear nuclear retaliation from the West.
What if President Biden or Trump, whoever it may be in charge at the time, what if they preempt this by saying, if in that eventuality of Russia starting to lose the war, and it's a big if, by the way, I would clarify that, but if they were to preempt it, preemptively say as President of the United States, warn Russia, if you use a nuclear weapon, we will help Ukraine defend itself with a nuclear weapon, then aren't they putting in the sand there a line of deterrent, which if it gets crossed, everyone understands what happens? Isn't that the only way it actually works? The only way a deterrent actually works is if the other side believes that you're going to use the same thing, or worse.
But you're assuming that the other side, which is the Russians in this case, would believe that threat. And I don't believe they would believe that threat.
Well, I think they'd have to.
America's bluff.
I think if you're America, you're going to have to want them to believe that threat. You've got to want them to believe you're serious. Otherwise, I just cannot picture a situation where Russia unleash a nuclear attack on a European country and America just doesn't respond in kind. There's no deterrent there. That's basically saying to Putin, you can use your nukes whenever you want against any country you like, and we, the great superpower of the world, will just stand by and let you do it. And we may attack you conventionally, but that is not going to be a like for like, and that's not going to be a deterrent, is what I think.
If you're a member of NATO, which Ukraine is not, you have an Article 5 guarantee, and you are depending on the American nuclear deterrent to provide security for you. So if a NATO country is attacked with nuclear weapons, there is some reasonable chance the United States will use nuclear weapons to defend that NATO country. But Ukraine is not a member of NATO, and Ukraine is not of great strategic importance to the United States. And therefore, the United States is not going to risk nuclear war to save Ukraine.
I mean,
it's that simple.
It wasn't.
This guy, Pierce, he's a gullible guy. He really is. He's super gullible, right? I'm actually embarrassed for Pierce, right? Because this is not a hard concept to understand. This dude is not saying anything super complicated. He's just simply saying that, listen, we just don't have enough strategic interest in Ukraine to treat them as if they're actually a real NATO ally. They're not a NATO ally. Therefore, we just don't have enough interest there to escalate to a nuclear war with Russia over that country, right? It's really not that hard, but because he buys into this narrative that Ukraine is such an important ally to the West because of freedom and democracy, right? He can't really understand exactly what this guy is saying. And that's why this guy is looking at Pierce like he's an idiot, because he's like, yeah, you're an idiot, right? You don't understand anything.
Wasn't a nuclear scenario, but when you look at what happened with the first invasion of Kuwait by Saddam Hussein, Kuwait was not a member of NATO, and yet America immediately sent boots on the ground to repel Saddam from Kuwait.
Well, I mean, Kuwait had oil, right? That's the difference, okay? Kuwait had oil, okay? There's a lot of countries, including our allies, that were dependent or are dependent on Kuwait's oil, okay? And this is why we went in and defended them because, hey, it's in our strategic interest, right? Saddam had to get his hands off of our oil, bruh. Okay? It ain't because we like Kuwait. It ain't because we love them as people. It ain't because of freedom and democracy. It's quite literally because they have a resource that it is in our interest, strategic interest, to protect. And we went in there and we kicked Saddam's army's ass in about, a month? Right? I mean, I'm just saying. It didn't take that long. The point being is that, again, there are reasons why we defend certain countries. And there's reasons why we don't defend other countries, right? There's reasons why we get involved in certain conflicts. And there's reasons why we don't get involved in other conflicts. It all has to do with the U.S.'s strategic interests. Multinational corporate interests, okay, resources, military interests. That's what it has to do with. It doesn't have anything else to do with anything outside of that, okay? Everything else they're telling you is a fairy tale.
I'm not sure there's a massive difference between Kuwait and the influence of that to America and the West and Ukraine, a massive sovereign democratic European country. It's been invaded by, illegally invaded by a nefarious power, and America didn't hesitate to kick Saddam out of Kuwait.
Also, Saddam didn't have nukes, okay? They didn't have nukes. They weren't U.S. invasion proof, which is what happens when you have nukes, okay? This is why Iran wants nukes. This is why North Korea has nukes. Because, again, nukes makes you U.S. invasion proof, okay? If Iraq had nukes and they had actual weapons of mass destruction, we would not have went into Iraq, okay? I'm keeping it 100. See, that's how you knew it was a lie. You knew it was a lie because we went in, okay? If they actually had them, we would not have went in. That's the only reason we have not invaded Iran is because they might have nukes, and that's the only reason we haven't invaded North Korea is because we know for a fact they got nukes. I'm just saying, Saddam didn't have nukes. Again, this is a completely irrelevant example that is being brought up by Pierce. I don't even know why he's bringing it up.
There's a huge difference between these two scenarios. There was no threat of nuclear war with regard to
No, I said it wasn't
Kuwait.
a nuclear situation.
The scenario that you're describing with regard to Ukraine involves nuclear weapons.
I
think
well, actually,
you
you
don't fully
hang on.
understand
Let me clarify.
just what we're talking about here. We're talking about nuclear
hang
weapons.
on.
We're talking about nuclear war.
Professor,
the United States of America does not take this threat lightly.
No.
This is a threat of huge magnitude.
No, I
We're
wasn't
talking about getting possibly incinerated.
I think you misheard what I said. I deliberately said it. I know it's not a nuclear situation. The point being, why should America defend Ukraine given it's not a NATO country? And I would say, well, nor was Kuwait a NATO country, but America did send boots on the ground there to kick out Saddam Hussein. Ideologically, what is the difference actually between defending Kuwait against Saddam and defending Ukraine against Vladimir Putin, however you end up doing it?
It's not about ideology. It's simply about resources, strategic interests, right? All this ideology stuff is ridiculous. It's not about that. Again, I can't believe that Pierce is such an NPC, right? This is such an NPC line of questioning. Like, it's unbelievable.
We're just not talking about defending Ukraine and defending Kuwait. We're talking about using nuclear weapons. We're talking about nuclear war. We're talking about the possibility of getting incinerated. This is not a matter one should take lightly. And you only use nuclear weapons under the most extreme circumstances. The United States would only use nuclear weapons if its survival was threatened. And the idea that the Russians conquering Ukraine or dropping a nuclear weapon on Ukraine threatens their survival and therefore should precipitate a nuclear war is, I think, not a smart argument. The fact is that if the Russians were to use nuclear weapons, the United States would not respond by precipitating a general nuclear war.
Then Putin wins, right?
Putin might win. That's right. And you want to remember that if you look at what's happening in the conventional war, it looks like Putin's going to win, despite the fact that we've now passed this large-scale arms package for Ukraine.
It's just amazing how you can tell how some people just cringe at the idea of certain things. Like, he just cringes at the idea of just, like, those words coming out of his mouth. Putin won. Putin's going to win, right? I mean, it's almost like people have been brainwashed into thinking like, oh, that's like the scariest thought ever is that Putin's going to win. It's like, well, no, it's not the situation that anybody wants. Like, we don't want to see that happen. I don't want to see Putin take over Ukraine. But at the end of the day, if it happens, it's not the end of the world for the United States. It's not the end of the world for Europe. Okay. And in fact, I'm actually trying to vouch for policies to prevent that from happening. But everybody else is not, right? All of these people want us to continue to fund this war that I think is more likely to lead to Putin winning, right? I think the best chance we have of Putin not winning is to, again, force a ceasefire, to force negotiations to where Putin will back down. But again, that's not what these people want to do. They want Ukraine literally to fight to the end. But, you know, according to them, they're so afraid of getting this outcome of Putin winning. Well, I can't tell. If you're so afraid of Putin winning, then you should, again, try to negotiate some type of ceasefire. But again, these people, they're not thinking at that type of level.
Is likely to win.
Why is that not a terrible thing for America and the West?
Because you have to prioritize the threats that you face in the world. And the fact of the matter is that what happens in Ukraine does not matter that much to the United States. I know for people like you, this is a life and death matter. The thought of any country on the planet that the West defends losing is a major defeat and has catastrophic consequences. I mean, you felt this way about us pulling out of Afghanistan. But I think that places like Afghanistan, even places like Ukraine, don't matter that much.
Actually, on that, I didn't really. I felt with Afghanistan, America should have kept a small military presence there to maintain some kind of order. And I think I was justified in saying that, given what's happened since.
No, you were not justified. You were not justified because no matter what was going to happen, it seems as if the Taliban was going to take back over that country. Leaving U.S. troops there would have just prolonged the inevitable. We would have kept losing lives periodically. We would have kept spending money. That country is a lost cause, right? It's not, we just don't need to be there, right? There's no real reason for us to continue to be there. It is what it is.
I thought throwing the country back to the Taliban was a catastrophic error of judgment, and it wouldn't have happened in the way it's happened if America kept a couple of thousand troops there, as it does all around the world in endless bases. So it seemed to me, having done many, many years of hard work in Afghanistan as a response to 9/11, to then simply just overnight throw everybody out and leave the country to the Taliban, particularly for women's rights, never mind anything else, I thought was an abrogation of America's duty, and the UK.
Women's rights. Again, such an NPC response. Again, he's adhering to the sunk cost fallacy, right? This idea that, well, we poured all these resources into this, so therefore we can't pull out of it, even though we know that, again, it's a lost cause. We can't give up on it because we poured all these resources into it. Therefore, we need to just keep wasting resources, even though we know it's a lost cause. That doesn't make sense. That's what Afghanistan was. We probably shouldn't have went in the first place.
Right, but this is your worldview, which is the United States has a responsibility to be everywhere and
Not
to never
everywhere,
quit until
but it should
wins.
certainly be preserving freedom and democracy. Otherwise, why self-style yourself as leader of the free world? You're either a leader of the free world, and America still has, I think, half the world's military firepower, and obviously one of the biggest economies. You either are that entity, leader of the free world, or you're not. And if you are, then what comes with that is a responsibility to protect freedom and democracy when it comes under attack from totalitarian regimes, I would think.
I think if you look at the history of American foreign policy, it's very hard to make the case that our principal goal has been to protect freedom and democracy. The United States has a rich history of overthrowing democracies around the world, and we have a rich history of siding with some of the world's biggest dictators. So this idea that we're out there protecting freedom and democracy and it's our principal goal, in my opinion, doesn't mesh with reality.
Yeah, it's childish, right? It's childish. Okay, and that's the mic drop, right? He just dropped the mic on NPC Pierce, who, again, seems to believe these Western politicians in the whole freedom and democracy nonsense that they use to justify a war that has nothing to do with freedom and democracy. Okay, they use that as a way to get people, normal people, to get on board with something that they otherwise won't get on board with. But see, my problem with that is that me personally, I would respect the politicians more if they was just truthful about their intentions, right? If they just say, hey, look, we're going to topple Saddam because we just don't like him anymore, right? He just doesn't meet our needs in regards to the type of leader that we need in that country. Therefore, we just gonna topple him, right? If they just said that, which was the actual truth, okay, they just didn't like Saddam, okay? I mean, we've been dealing with this tyrant for the longest time. We want to get rid of him. If they just would have said that, I'd be like, all right, cool, I can respect that, right? I respect that. Let the American public decide, okay, do they want to support it? But at least I respect the honesty, right? What I don't respect is the lies. And again, this doesn't make America evil to conduct foreign policy this way. This is just how foreign policy is conducted. That's how every country operates. Russia, China, you name it. In any country that's playing a geopolitical game, this is the way they operate. They're not operating based off morality. They're not operating based off, freedom and democracy. They're not operating based off any of those things. They're operating based off what is in our broader geopolitical strategic interest. That is the way they operate. I just wish they were more honest about it. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.